I had always prided myself on being the kind of man who understood the complexities of life, the kind who could see through the bullshit that others often missed. Maybe that's why I fell so hard for Natalia. She was like a breath of fresh air in a world that often reeked of staleness. Beautiful in a way that was almost otherworldly, with her dark hair cascading in loose waves around her shoulders and those deep brown eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. Natalia was everything I could have ever wanted in a woman, and more. I met her at a work function, one of those dull corporate events where everyone puts on their best fake smiles and pretends to enjoy the terrible hors d'oeuvres. But Natalia stood out like a beacon in the night. She was smart, engaging, and had a laugh that could light up the darkest room. We clicked immediately, and within a few months, we were inseparable. Our life together seemed perfect. We both had successful careers, she in marketing for a major fashion brand and I in finance, managing high-stakes investments for wealthy clients. We traveled often, dined at the best restaurants, and our social calendar was always full. On the surface, it looked like we had it all. People envied us, admired us, and some probably even wished they could trade places with us. But the thing about perfection is that it's often a facade, a beautiful, glittering facade that hides the cracks beneath. And those cracks? They were there from the beginning, but I was too blind, too smitten to notice. I guess it started with the little things, late nights at the office, unexplained absences, the way she'd sometimes pull away when I tried to kiss her. At first, I dismissed it as stress. Our jobs were demanding, and I knew the pressure she was under to perform at work. But then, there were the phone calls. Those damned phone calls that she'd take in the other room, her voice hushed, her tone serious. She'd always come up with some excuse, work-related, she'd say. But the doubt had already started to creep in. One night, after a particularly grueling day at work, I came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone with an expression I couldn't quite place. When she noticed me, she quickly locked the screen and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah, just a long day," she replied, leaning in to kiss me. But there was something off about it. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I didn't push it, though. I didn't want to believe that anything could be wrong between us. But that nagging feeling, it wouldn't go away. And soon, I found myself questioning everything. Was she really at work when she said she was? Who was she texting so late at night? Why did she seem so distant, so detached? The doubts festered, growing into a gnawing suspicion that I couldn't shake. It wasn't until much later that I realized how naive I had been. How I had ignored all the warning signs, all the red flags that were so blatantly obvious in hindsight. But by then, it was too late. The damage had already been done. Our relationship, which once felt like the envy of all, had slowly turned into something that I couldn't quite recognize. The tension between us was palpable, like an invisible wall that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. We went through the motions, dinner dates, social gatherings, the occasional weekend getaway, but the spark that had once ignited our passion was fading, replaced by something cold and distant. I started noticing more things, little things that didn't add up. Her phone was always on silent, and she'd never leave it unattended. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd quickly switch screens, as if she had something to hide. I tried not to let it bother me, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, after a long day at work, I came home to find her already in bed, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Tough day?" I asked, kicking off my shoes and sitting on the edge of the bed. "Yeah," she replied absently, her eyes glued to the screen. "Just a lot going on at work." "Anything I can help with?" I offered, trying to sound supportive. She shook her head. "No, it's fine. Just some deadlines I need to meet." I nodded, but the uneasy feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. I wanted to believe her, but the distance between us was growing with each passing day. And the more I tried to reach out, the more she seemed to pull away. Our SX life had dwindled to almost nothing. At first I chalked it up to stress. We were both working long hours, and I knew how exhausting her job could be. But even on the weekends, when we had time to ourselves, she seemed disinterested, almost indifferent. It was as if the woman I had fallen in love with was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. One evening, while she was in the shower, I couldn't resist the urge to check her phone. I knew it was wrong. I knew that invading her privacy was a line I shouldn't cross, but the doubt had consumed me, and I needed answers. My heart pounded in my chest as I unlocked her phone, scrolling through her messages. Most of them were harmless, texts from colleagues, friends, and family. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize. Alex. The messages were innocuous enough, but there was something about the tone, the familiarity, that set off alarm bells in my head. I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. Instead, I watched and waited, hoping that I was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for it all. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance between us only grew, and I knew that something had to give. I tried to focus on my work, to lose myself in the numbers and figures that had always been my refuge. But even there, I couldn't escape the gnawing doubt that plagued me. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, I'd feel a jolt of panic, half expecting it to be some message that would confirm my worst fears. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at the office, I came home to find Natalia in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air, but there was an unusual tension in her posture, a stiffness that hadn't been there before. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Smells great in here." She turned to me with a tight smile. "Thanks. I thought I'd surprise you." I nodded, but the unease in my gut wouldn't go away. We ate in near silence, the clinking of silverware the only sound breaking the heavy atmosphere. After dinner, she excused herself, saying she needed to finish up some work. As she retreated to her office, I sat there in the dimly lit dining room, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. What was happening to us? How had we gone from being so in love to this, a hollow shell of what we once were? I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs, couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. But confronting her? That was a step I wasn't sure I was ready to take. Because deep down, I knew that once the truth came out, there would be no going back. And part of me was terrified of what that truth might be. The tension between Natalia and me was now something I couldn't ignore, and it was starting to affect every part of my life. Work was becoming unbearable. My concentration shot, my patience frayed. I found myself snapping at colleagues over trivial matters, my mind always elsewhere. I kept replaying all the suspicious moments in my head, over and over, like a broken record. And then, there was Alex. The name haunted me, creeping into my thoughts at the most unexpected times. I started to become obsessed with finding out who this person was, and what role they played in Natalia's life. But I still couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. Instead, I continued to play the part of the loving husband, hoping that somehow I'd stumble upon the truth without having to face the wreckage it would undoubtedly cause. One evening, I came home late after an excruciating day at work. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and all I wanted was to crash on the couch and forget about the world for a while. But as soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was off. The house was too quiet, too still. "Natalia?" I called out, but there was no answer. I checked the kitchen, the living room. Nothing. Her car was in the driveway, so I knew she had to be home. My heart started pounding as I made my way upstairs. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw her. She was standing by the window, her back to me, her phone pressed to her ear. She was speaking in hushed tones, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't talk right now," she said, her tone urgent. "He just got home." My blood ran cold. There was no mistaking the fear in her voice, the way she was trying so hard to keep whoever was on the other end of the line from hearing me. She turned around, startled, when she noticed me standing there. For a split second, her eyes widened in panic, but she quickly composed herself, forcing a smile onto her face. "Oh, hey," she said, trying to sound casual. "I was just finishing up a call with a client." "A client?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't hide the disbelief in my tone. "Yes, a client," she insisted, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Just some last-minute work stuff." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. She was lying to me. I knew it in my gut. And yet I couldn't bring myself to call her out on it. Not directly. She hung up the phone and came over to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "I'm sorry," she murmured, pressing a kiss to my cheek. No, I've been distracted lately. Work has just been so stressful." I nodded numbly, my body going through the motions even as my mind screamed at me to do something, to say something. But I didn't. Instead, I let her lead me downstairs, where she had already set the table for dinner. That night, as we ate in strained silence, I made a decision. I couldn't keep going on like this, couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Over the next few days, I began to pay closer attention to Natalia's habits. I noted the times when she'd suddenly have to work late, or when she'd get mysterious calls and texts that she'd quickly brush off as work-related. The more I observed, the more my suspicions grew, and the more I realized that I needed to take action. One evening, when Natalia was in the shower, I finally did what I had been dreading for so long. I went through her phone again. This time, I wasn't just skimming through messages, I was digging, looking for anything that would confirm what I already knew in my heart. It didn't take long to find it. There, in her messages, were texts from Alex. But these weren't just the casual, professional exchanges she had claimed they were. These were intimate, flirtatious messages that left no room for doubt. One text in particular made my stomach churn. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again?" I felt the ground shift beneath me, the world as I knew it crumbling into dust. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the conversation, each message a knife twisting deeper into my heart. There were details, places they had met, times they had spent together, things she had never mentioned to me. And then there was the final, undeniable proof, a photo of the two of them taken in what looked like a hotel room. They were wrapped in each other's arms, their smiles wide and unguarded, their bodies pressed together in a way that left no doubt about what had happened between them. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I felt sick to my stomach, the bile rising in my throat. This was it, the moment I had feared, the truth I had been so desperate to avoid. Natalia, my wife, the woman I had loved more than anything, had betrayed me. And the worst part? She had been lying to my face every day, pretending that everything was fine while she was off with someone else, living a double life. When she came out of the shower, I was still sitting on the bed, her phone lying next to me, the damning messages still open on the screen. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening in horror as she realized what I had found. "What are you doing?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I looked up at her, the woman I had loved, and in that moment, I didn't recognize her. She wasn't the Natalia I had fallen for. She was someone else entirely, a stranger who had ripped my heart out and stomped on it without a second thought. "Who the fuck is Alex?" I demanded, my voice cold and flat, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. And then, the tears started. Big fat tears that rolled down her cheeks as she tried to form words, excuses, anything to make it all go away. But it was too late. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and there was no going back. The woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Natalia crumpled to the floor in front of me, her sobs racking her body as she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her fall apart, feeling nothing but a hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. There was no sympathy, no urge to comfort her, just a cold, simmering rage that threatened to consume me. "Who is Alex?" I repeated, each word dripping with the venom I could barely contain. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. I'm so sorry, Martin. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just... Don't you fucking dare say it just happened, I snapped, cutting her off. You don't accidentally fall into bed with someone else. You don't accidentally send flirty texts or sneak around behind your husband's back. This wasn't a mistake, Natalia. This was a choice, a deliberate, calculated choice. She flinched at my words, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know, she whispered, her voice choked with guilt. I don't know what I was thinking. I never wanted to hurt you, Martin. I never wanted any of this. Bullshit! I spat, the anger finally breaking through the numbness that had gripped me. You knew exactly what you were doing. You knew the risks, the consequences, and you did it anyway. So don't stand there and try to play the victim. She shook her head, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Please, Martin, let me explain. Let me tell you how it all started. Maybe if you understand... Understand? I interrupted, incredulous. You think I want to hear your excuses? You think anything you say is going to make this better? But she kept going, her words spilling out in a desperate rush. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Alex was just a friend at first, someone I could talk to when things got hard. We started out just texting, then meeting for coffee. I was lonely, Martin. You were always so busy with work, so distracted. I didn't feel like you were there for me anymore. And Alex, he listened. He was there. Spare me the sob story, I said, my voice laced with disdain. So I wasn't attentive enough? That's your excuse for screwing around with some other guy? It wasn't just that, she insisted, her voice rising in pitch, almost hysterical now. I never planned for it to go this far, but one night after too many drinks, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, She broke off, her voice catching in her throat. You had SX, I finished for her, the words heavy, laden with the finality of it all. She nodded, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment, any lingering hope I had of salvaging our marriage died a swift, brutal death. I had suspected, of course. I'd seen the signs, the messages, but hearing her admit it, hearing her say those words, it was like a dagger to the heart. Do you love him? I asked, my voice low and dangerous, almost daring her to lie to me again. Her eyes widened in panic. No, I don't love him, Martin. It was just an escape, a stupid, selfish mistake. You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you like this. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. An escape? From what? The life we built together? The life that you and I created? Was that really so unbearable that you had to go running into someone else's arms? She didn't answer, just sobbed harder, her whole body shaking with the force of it. I could see the guilt and shame etched on her face, but it didn't soften the blow. If anything, it made it worse. Because now I knew that she hadn't just betrayed me. She had destroyed everything we had, everything I had ever believed in. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her fall apart. I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something, anything, to release the fury that was building inside me. But all I could manage was a cold, lifeless stare as I looked down at the woman who had once been my whole world. "I trusted you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I loved you. And this is how you repay me?" "I'm so sorry," she whispered again, her voice trembling with fear and regret. "Please, Martin, don't leave me. We can work through this, I swear. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I could barely process her words. Make it right? How could she even suggest such a thing? There was no going back from this, no undoing the damage that had been done. Our marriage was over, shattered into a million pieces by her betrayal. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said, my voice hollow, devoid of emotion. "I don't know if I even want to try." Her face crumpled, and she let out a heart-wrenching sob, collapsing onto the floor in front of me. "Please, Martin," she begged, reaching out to grab my hand. "Please don't leave me. I'll do anything, I swear. Just give me another chance." I pulled my hand away, recoiling from her touch as if it burned me. "Another chance?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "After everything you've done, you really think there's anything left to save?" She nodded desperately, her eyes wide and pleading. "Yes, I do. We can get through this. We can go to counseling, we can talk. Anything, Martin. I'll do anything to fix this." But as I looked at her, broken and desperate on the floor, I knew there was nothing she could say or do to fix this. The trust was gone, the love we once had irrevocably tainted by her actions. And no amount of therapy or apologies could change that. "I need some air," I said, my voice cold and detached as I turned to leave the room. "Martin, wait!" she cried, but I didn't stop. I couldn't bear to be in the same room with her any longer. The walls were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I needed to get out, to escape from the nightmare my life had become. I grabbed my coat and keys and walked out the front door, leaving her sobbing on the floor. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away, to clear my head, to try and make sense of the chaos that had taken over my life. But as I drove aimlessly through the city, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. My wife, the woman I had loved and trusted with everything, had betrayed me. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been ripped apart by her lies and deceit. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know if I could ever forgive her, or if I even wanted to. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, replaced by a bitter, painful truth that I could never escape. I drove for hours, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon as I circled aimlessly through the streets. The anger, the betrayal, it all simmered inside me like a storm waiting to explode. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The muscles in my jaw clenched until it ached. I felt like I was losing control, like the life I'd built was crumbling around me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Finally, I pulled into a dark, empty parking lot on the outskirts of town. I killed the engine and just sat there, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. My mind raced, replaying the scene with Natalia over and over again, each time more excruciating than the last. Her tears, her pleas for forgiveness, they were burned into my brain, but they meant nothing to me now. They couldn't undo the damage she'd caused. I thought about calling someone, one of my friends maybe, or even my sister. But what would I say? How could I possibly explain the mess my life had become? How could I admit that I'd been so completely blind, so utterly fooled by the woman I thought I knew better than anyone? The thought of their pity, their looks of sympathy made me sick to my stomach. I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my mind a tangled mess of rage, pain, and disbelief. Eventually, the exhaustion caught up with me, and I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. But even with them shut, I couldn't escape the images that haunted me. Natalia with Alex, laughing, kissing, wrapped in each other's arms. The look in her eyes when she'd confessed. How much of that had been real? And how much was just another lie? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the early hours of the morning driving aimlessly through the city, my thoughts spiraling deeper into the abyss. When the sun finally began to rise, I found myself parked outside a dingy motel on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed with a faint hum, flickering sporadically. It was a far cry from the life I was used to, but I didn't care. I couldn't go home. Not yet. I paid for a room in cash, not wanting to leave a trace of where I was. The clerk barely looked at me as he handed me the key, his eyes glazed with disinterest. I trudged up the narrow stairs to my room, my feet feeling like lead. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew, the carpet worn and threadbare. It was a place for people who wanted to disappear, and for the first time in my life, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling. The events of the night played over in my mind like a broken record, but I couldn't bring myself to think about what came next. The idea of facing Natalia again, of dealing with the aftermath of her betrayal, was too much to bear. I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. But time was a luxury I didn't have. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I hesitated before pulling it out, the screen lighting up with a message from Natalia. "Please, Martin, come home. We need to talk. I'm so sorry. I'm begging you. Just give me a chance to explain. I love you." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. A part of me wanted to respond, to tell her exactly how much she'd hurt me, to demand answers to the questions that plagued my mind. But the other part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock, couldn't bring itself to engage with her. Not yet. I put the phone back in my pocket and rolled over, facing the wall. I wasn't ready to face her. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses or her promises to change. The pain was too raw, too fresh. I needed to get a grip on my emotions before I could even think about dealing with her. The hours passed in a haze, the minutes dragging by in an agonizing crawl. I didn't leave the room, didn't eat, didn't sleep. I just lay there, trapped in my own mind, replaying everything over and over again until I thought I'd go insane. By the time the sun had set again, I knew I couldn't stay in that motel forever. I couldn't keep running from my problems, no matter how much I wanted to. I had to go back. I had to face Natalia, had to figure out what came next, whether that meant trying to salvage what was left of our marriage or walking away from it all for good. I took a deep breath and stood up, my legs shaky from lack of use. I splashed some cold water on my face in the tiny bathroom, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. I looked like hell, my eyes bloodshot, my face pale and drawn. I barely recognized the man staring back at me. With a heavy sigh, I grabbed my keys and headed out of the room, leaving the stale air and dim light behind me. The night was cool, a light breeze ruffling my hair as I walked to the car. I slid into the driver's seat and stared at the steering wheel for a long moment, gathering my resolve. It was time to face the music. As I drove back through the city, the familiar streets passing by in a blur, I tried to brace myself for what was to come. I didn't know what I would say to Natalia or how I would react when I saw her again. All I knew was that things could never go back to the way they were. Too much had been broken, too much trust shattered. But I couldn't avoid her forever. I had to confront her, had to find out if there was anything left worth saving. When I finally pulled into the driveway of our home, my stomach twisted into knots. The house loomed in front of me, dark and silent, like a tomb. I hesitated before getting out of the car, my hand resting on the door handle. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, the betrayal, the lies, the uncertain future. I steeled myself and got out of the car, my steps slow and heavy as I approached the front door. The house was eerily quiet as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of home washing over me. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I didn't belong. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamps outside. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence, my heart pounding in my chest. And then, I heard it. A soft sobbing coming from upstairs. I followed the sound, my footsteps heavy on the stairs. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw her. Natalia was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. She didn't look up when I entered the room, didn't acknowledge my presence. She was lost in her own world of pain and regret. For a moment I just stood there, watching her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over me like a suffocating blanket. I wanted to feel angry, wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but all I felt was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. I was so damn tired, tired of the lies, tired of the pain, tired of the life I thought I had, but never really did. "Natalia," I said quietly, my voice breaking the silence. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. The sight of her like that, so broken and vulnerable, stirred something inside me, something I couldn't quite define. But it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. "Martin," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I walked over to the bed and sat down beside her, the mattress dipping under our combined weight. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know where we go from here," I finally said, my voice low and hoarse. "But I know that things can't stay the way they are. I can't live like this, Natalia. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But please, Martin, let's not give up on us. Let's try to fix this somehow." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had made me believe in love, who had been my partner, my confidant, my everything. But she wasn't that woman anymore. She had changed, and so had I. And the life we had built together? It was gone, shattered by her betrayal. But as I sat there, the silence hanging heavy between us, I realized that I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. There was still a part of me that wanted to fight, that wanted to believe that we could somehow rebuild what had been lost. It wouldn't be easy, and I didn't know if it was. The days that followed were some of the most excruciating of my life. Natalia and I were like two strangers inhabiting the same space, walking on eggshells around each other, speaking only when necessary. The tension in the house was unbearable, a thick cloud of unspoken words and unresolved emotions hanging over us. I didn't know how to navigate this new reality, didn't know how to look at her without seeing the betrayal etched across her face. I took time off work, needing space to process everything that had happened. But even with the extra time, my mind was a battlefield. I would swing between moments of intense anger, where the thought of her with Alex made my blood boil, to moments of crushing sadness, where all I could do was sit and stare at the walls, wondering how we had gotten here. Natalia tried, she really did. She would make my favorite meals, leave me notes of apology around the house, and even suggested we see a therapist together. But no matter what she did, it felt like too little, too late. The trust between us was broken, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. One night, about a week after the confrontation, Natalia sat down beside me on the couch. We had been watching TV in silence, the sound of the show just background noise to the chaos in my mind. "Martin," she said softly, turning to face me. We can't keep going on like this. We need to talk. Really talk. I stared at the screen for a moment, my jaw tight, before nodding. Yeah, we do. She turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she began, her voice trembling. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this. To fix us. I clenched my fists in my lap, the familiar surge of anger rising in my chest. You say that, Natalia, but how am I supposed to believe you? How am I supposed to trust anything you say after what you've done? She flinched at my words but didn't look away. I don't expect you to trust me right away. I know I have to earn that back if it's even possible. But Martin, please, I'm begging you, don't give up on us. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I love you, and I want to fight for us. I need to fight for us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, the raw emotion in her voice cutting through the wall of anger I had built around myself. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her that it was too late, that nothing she could do would ever make me forget what she had done. But there was another part of me, a part that still loved her despite everything, that wanted to believe her. You say you love me, I said, my voice low and steady. But if that's true, how could you do this to me? How could you betray me like this? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out to take my hand. I was selfish, Martin. I was weak. I let my insecurities and my loneliness drive me to do something I will always regret. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. I do, more than anything. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that to you. I pulled my hand away, unable to bear her touch. Words aren't enough, Natalia. Not anymore. You want to prove you love me? Then you're going to have to show it. She nodded, wiping away her tears. I will. I swear I will. We sat in silence for a long time after that, the enormity of what lay ahead sinking in. This wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be something we could just talk through and move on from. If we were going to have any chance at saving our marriage, it was going to take a lot of work, a lot of pain, and a lot of time. But despite everything, despite the anger and the hurt, I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't ready to throw away the years we had spent together, the memories we had built. There was a part of me that still believed in us, that still wanted to fight for what we had. Fine, I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. We'll try. But this is your one and only chance, Natalia. If you ever betray me again, we're done. Do you understand? She nodded quickly, her eyes wide with relief. I understand. I promise, Martin, I won't let you down again. We decided to go to therapy, something I had never imagined myself doing. But if there was any chance of salvaging our marriage, we needed help. We needed someone to guide us through the mess we had made of our lives. The first session was brutal. Our therapist, a calm, middle-aged woman named Dr. Stevens, didn't pull any punches. She made us lay everything out on the table, the betrayal, the lies, the hurt we had both been feeling. It was excruciating, having to relive the worst moments of our marriage in front of a stranger, but it was also cathartic in a way. For the first time, I heard Natalia explain what had driven her to cheat. She talked about the loneliness she had felt, how she had started to feel like I wasn't really there for her anymore, how Alex had filled that void. It was hard to listen to, knowing that I had played a part in pushing her away, but it also made me realize how much we had both let our marriage fall apart. Dr. Stevens didn't let me off the hook either. She made me confront the ways I had neglected Natalia, the ways I had let work and stress consume me, how I had stopped being the partner she needed. It was painful, having to face my own failures, but it was also necessary. If we were going to rebuild, we had to be honest with each other, and with ourselves. The sessions were grueling. We fought, we cried, we said things that we could never take back. But we also started to understand each other in a way we hadn't before. I began to see how my actions had contributed to the breakdown of our marriage, how I had let things slip without even realizing it. But understanding didn't erase the hurt. There were days when I couldn't even look at Natalia. Days when the anger would bubble up, and I'd find myself lashing out at her, saying things I knew would cut deep. And there were nights when she would break down, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. It was a constant struggle, 1 step forward and 2 steps back. There were moments when I wanted to walk away, when I thought it would be easier to just end things and start over. But every time I got to that point, I would remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the way she had always been there for me when I needed her most. And I would find the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for us. But the hardest part was trusting her again. Every time she left the house, every time she got a text or a call, my mind would go to dark places. I would wonder if she was seeing Alex, if she was lying to me again. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of suspicion, but I couldn't help it. The wound was still too fresh, too raw. Natalia knew this, and she did everything she could to reassure me. She gave me access to her phone, her emails, everything. She stopped going out without telling me exactly where she was going, who she was with. It felt like she was walking on a tightrope, trying to prove that she could be trusted again, while also giving me the space to heal. But trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's never the same. And as much as I wanted to believe her, as much as I wanted to move past what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I knew that if we were going to have any chance at a future together, I had to let go of the past. I had to forgive her, truly forgive her, and start rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. But that was easier said than done. And then, just when I thought we were starting to make progress, everything came crashing down again. It happened on a Monday, a day like any other. Natalia had left for work, and I was sitting in the living room trying to focus on some paperwork. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at it absent-mindedly. It was a message from an unknown number. "Martin, I know you're trying to work things out with Natalia, but you need to know the truth. She's still seeing Alex. They've been meeting up behind your back. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you deserve to know." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I read them over and over again, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. No, it couldn't be true. She wouldn't do that. Not after everything we had been through, not after all the promises she had made. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me, whisper. The message hung in the air like a dark cloud, each word burning itself into my mind. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The unknown number, the blunt revelation. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. She's still seeing Alex. Those words looped in my head, refusing to leave. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing, spreading its roots through my thoughts, choking out any hope I had left. I paced the living room, trying to calm myself, to think rationally. Who had sent the message? Was it some cruel joke, someone trying to mess with my head? Or was it real? Was Natalia really still seeing him? My mind raced back to the therapy sessions, the countless times she had sworn she was done with Alex, that she wanted to rebuild our marriage. Had it all been a lie? Another elaborate deception? I couldn't just sit there stewing in uncertainty. I needed answers. I needed proof. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and keys and rushed out of the house, my mind a whirlwind of anger and fear. If she was still seeing Alex, if she had betrayed me again, I needed to know. I needed to catch her in the act. I drove to her office, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The streets blurred past me, my vision tunneling as I focused on one thing, finding out the truth. When I arrived at the building, I parked across the street, out of sight, but with a clear view of the entrance. I didn't know what I was looking for, didn't know what I expected to find. All I knew was that I had to see it for myself. I had to know if she was still lying to me. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly, each one stretching into an eternity. My thoughts spiraled out of control, a toxic mix of suspicion and despair. What if she wasn't at work? What if she was with him right now? What if she had never stopped seeing him? And then, just as I was about to lose hope, I saw her. Natalia walked out of the building, her head down, her pace hurried. My heart leaped into my throat as I watched her scan the street before hailing a cab. She wasn't going home. She wasn't going anywhere she had. There were days when I couldn't even look at Natalia. Days when the anger would bubble up and I'd find myself lashing out at her, saying things I knew would cut deep. And there were nights when she would break down, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. It was a constant struggle, one step forward and two steps back. There were moments when I wanted to walk away, when I thought it would be easier to just end things and start over. But every time I got to that point, I would remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the way she had always been there for me when I needed her most. And I would find the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for us. But the hardest part was trusting her again. Every time she left the house, every time she got a text or a call, my mind would go to dark places. I would wonder if she was seeing Alex, if she was lying to me again. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of suspicion, but I couldn't help it. The wound was still too fresh, too raw. Natalia knew this, and she did everything she could to reassure me. She gave me access to her phone, her emails, everything. She stopped going out without telling me exactly where she was going, who she was with. It felt like she was walking on a tightrope, trying to prove that she could be trusted again, while also giving me the space to heal. But trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's never the same. And as much as I wanted to believe her, as much as I wanted to move past what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I knew that if we were going to have any chance at a future together, I had to let go of the past. I had to forgive her, truly forgive her, and start rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. But that was easier said than done. And then, just when I thought we were starting to make progress, everything came crashing down again. It happened on a Monday, a day like any other. Natalia had left for work, and I was sitting in the living room trying to focus on some paperwork. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at it absent-mindedly. It was a message from an unknown number. "Martin, I know you're trying to work things out with Natalia, but you need to know the truth. She's still seeing Alex. They've been meeting up behind your back. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you deserve to know." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I read them over and over again, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. No, it couldn't be true. She wouldn't do that. Not after everything we had been through, not after all the promises she had made. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me. Whisper. The message hung in the air like a dark cloud, each word burning itself into my mind. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The unknown number, the blunt revelation, it was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. She's still seeing Alex. Those words looped in my head, refusing to leave. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and it was growing, spreading its roots through my thoughts, choking out any hope I had left. I paced the living room, trying to calm myself, to think rationally. Who had sent the message? Was it some cruel joke, someone trying to mess with my head? Or was it real? Was Natalia really still seeing him? My mind raced back to the therapy sessions, the countless times she had sworn she was done with Alex, that she wanted to rebuild our marriage. Had it all been a lie? Another elaborate deception? I couldn't just sit there stewing in uncertainty. I needed answers. I needed proof. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and keys and rushed out of the house, my mind a whirlwind of anger and fear. If she was still seeing Alex, if she had betrayed me, told me about. My blood ran cold as I realized what this meant. I started the car and followed the cab at a safe distance, my mind reeling. Was she really going to meet Alex? After everything we had been through, after all the promises she had made, was she really going to betray me again? The cab wove through the city streets, taking turns that led farther and farther away from familiar territory. My stomach churned as I realized where we were heading, the same part of town where I had found that dingy motel. When the cab finally pulled over and Natalia stepped out, my worst fears were confirmed. She wasn't alone. Standing there, waiting for her, was Alex. The two of them exchanged a quick, furtive glance before disappearing into the motel together, the door closing behind them like the final nail in the coffin. For a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The scene in front of me felt like something out of a nightmare, too surreal to be real. But it was real. It was happening, and the cold, hard truth of it hit me like a freight train. There were days when I couldn't even look at Natalia. Days when the anger would bubble up, and I'd find myself lashing out at her, saying things I knew would cut deep. And there were nights when she would break down, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for forgiveness that I wasn't ready to give. It was a constant struggle, one step forward and two steps back. There were moments when I wanted to walk away, when I thought it would be easier to just end things and start over. But every time I got to that point, I would remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the way she had always been there for me when I needed her most. And I would find the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for us. But the hardest part was trusting her again. Every time she left the house, every time she got a text or a call, my mind would go to dark places. I would wonder if she was seeing Alex, if she was lying to me again. It was exhausting, living in a constant state of suspicion, but I couldn't help it. The wound was still too fresh, too raw. Natalia knew this, and she did everything she could to reassure me. She gave me access to her phone, her emails, everything. She stopped going out without telling me exactly where she was going, who she was with. It felt like she was walking on a tightrope, trying to prove that she could be trusted again, while also giving me the space to heal. But trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it's never the same. And as much as I wanted to believe her, as much as I wanted to move past what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I knew that if we were going to have any chance at a future together, I had to let go of the past. I had to forgive her, truly forgive her, and start rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. But that was easier said than done. And then, just when I thought we were starting to make progress, everything came crashing down again. It happened on a Monday, a day like any other. Natalia had left for work, and I was sitting in the living room, trying to focus on some paperwork. My phone buzzed with a notification, and I glanced at it absent-mindedly. It was a message from an unknown number. "Martin, I know you're trying to work things out with Natalia, but you need to know the truth. She's still seeing Alex. They've been meeting up behind your back. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but you deserve to know." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I read them over and over again, my mind refusing to believe what I was seeing. No, it couldn't be true. She wouldn't do that. Not after everything we had been through, not after all the promises she had made. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me, whisper. The message hung in the air like a dark cloud, each word burning itself into my mind. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The unknown number, the blunt revelation. It was like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. She's still seeing Alex. Betrayed me. again. The shock quickly gave way to a white-hot rage that surged through my veins like fire. I couldn't believe this was happening. Couldn't believe that she had the audacity to lie to me, to deceive me again after everything we had been through. The betrayal was like a physical wound, deep and bleeding, and I felt myself spiraling into a darkness I had never known before. I got out of the car, my legs feeling like they were moving on autopilot, and crossed the street toward the motel. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds, and my vision narrowed until all I could see was the door they had gone through. Before I knew it, I was at the door, my hand raised to knock. But I didn't knock. Instead, I stood there for a moment, the gravity of what I was about to do sinking in. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever happened next would change everything, forever. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. It turned easily in my grip, and with a push, the door swung open. There they were, Natalia and Alex, caught in the middle of an embrace that left no doubt about what was going on. The shock on their faces when they saw me standing there was almost satisfying, but it wasn't enough to dull the pain ripping through me. "What the fuck are you doing here?" I spat, my voice trembling with rage. Natalia pulled away from Alex, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Martin, I can explain." "Don't you fucking dare!" I snapped, cutting her off. "Don't you dare try to explain this." Alex stood there, frozen in place, his hands raised as if he were surrendering to some invisible enemy. "Look, man, this isn't what it looks like." "Shut up," I growled, turning my fury on him. "Just shut the fuck up." The room seemed to close in around us, the air thick with tension. I could feel the rage boiling over, my vision going red as I took a step toward Alex. He backed up, his hands